it's me, Galen. Galen's got Parkinson's. I'm going to follow my personal journey through model figures, just to show you what it was like and to have a bit of nostalgia for myself, and hopefully some of you might comment about what your journey was like. So I started playing with soldiers toys in the 1950s, and there were two very specific sorts. In the 50s you could get Britons. My granddad had a few of his old lead cast figures. He had a couple of Native Americans kneeling down, firing rifles, and they ended up in my collection. And my dad had a few toy soldiers, but not many. We were a mining family. Toys were a bit of a luxury, I think, if I'm being honest. None of my friends had things like toy forts. We were very basic. So we had some Britons. They tended to arrive at Christmas and birthdays, if I'm honest. And we had Timpo. I had the cowboys and the Native Americans. I didn't have all the knights in armour and things, although they were around. But it was the Wild West set. Now, you have to remember, this is pre-Swappets and all the buildings and so on that I use now, because they didn't arrive until 1960. I've got a feeling that Timpo has something to do with trade import coming from a different country, but I'm not doing any research. I don't like facts that get in the way. In 1963, which I can date quite precisely, my brother, my middle brother as he became, at the time he was my youngest brother, bought our very first Airfix kits. They were in boxes. Later than that, they were looser. I got Robin Hood's men, and they were on green sprues, and he got World War II Russians. World War II Russians had only just come out. They were brand new. So that is 1963. And there wasn't a lot of choice. Now, later on, by 68, there were a lot of Airfix figures. It was like an explosion of Airfix figures. And my best pal at the time, Andy, and I were very much into the Napoleonic Wars. And it sort of resonates with me because it's the year we went to secondary school. And I had British infantry and he had French infantry. We didn't have any cavalry, but we did have artillery. And we played our first, what I would call a war game. The carpet in the bedroom was in, it was a sort of dull brown colour, but there were greens, there were squares edged in green. So we said, okay, that's a field system. And we could move as many men as we wanted from one square to another, a bit like checkers or drafts, whichever country, whether you're UK or USA. But to get into a square, you had to outnumber the enemy. So if Andy had 6 men in a square and I wanted to take it, I had to attack it with 7. And because we only had one box of each, we didn't have anyone dying, that would push you back. And if I beat him by 1, he went back 1 square. If I beat him by 2, he went back 2 squares. And then it was his turn. And we gave artillery a range. And again, we didn't throw any dice or anything. We said every gun is worth 4. So, and it went down. So a gun facing a square was 4, and then 3, then 2, then 1. So a gun couldn't clear out men from a square if it had 1 man in it when it was 4 away. But if it was 3 away, it could, because 1 gun would knock out 2 men. And then later on we got cavalry. I remember Andy got cuirassiers. I can't remember if I got any cavalry. And I know because we weren't spoilt for choice. We also got some American War of Independence troops because they were the same colour. They were sort of creamy white plastic, and they all got thrown into the mix so we could have bigger games. In 1972, my dad arranged for us to go to the local adult Wargames club, which was at the YMCA in Doncaster. And when I arrived, the large groups of chaps were playing Napoleonic, 25mm Hinchcliffe, French, British, and they used Wargames Research Group. I'd never seen anything like that. People throwing dice and measuring and charts and morale tests. I really was excited. And one of the older men, the sort of senior men in the club, said to me, why don't you get something different? If you get British, with loads of British, with lots of French, why don't you get something different? Why don't you get, I don't know, Prussians? And I thought, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that. I'd never even heard of Prussians. I'd heard of Russians, but I'd never heard of Prussians. So I did that. And the figures were, depends what they were, anything between sort of 6p and 8p for an infantryman. And I got 25 pence a week pocket money. So my mum would go into the shop in town, the stamp corner, and she would say, oh, our Galen wants however many Prussians I could afford. And sometimes somebody might give me a couple of bob for doing errands, and I might be able to get a couple more. It was usually, in my memory, it was 4. I could usually manage to stretch to 4. And then I would get them and I'd paint them like bonkers using Humbrol paint. And then they'd arrive, and at the start, when I only had 4, they didn't do very much in the game because there weren't many of them. But once I got to 30, which was the standard unit, between 24 and 30, at my club it was 30, and I had a standard bearer, and I had a drummer, and I had a lieutenant, then suddenly I've got a viable unit now, and I can attach myself to the games the men were playing. And then over time, perhaps over a year, I ended up with an artillery piece, only one, a 6-pounder it was, with a limber and crew. And then I got 12 cavalry, because we counted that as a squadron. They were hussars. And then I was able to take independent commands of things. I remember the first big game I ever played, because once every month, every 2 months, we'd play a massive game. We'd all turn up at the club, we'd put all the tables out, and everyone would bring all the scenery. And when I started, I didn't have very much scenery. But as you get more, you bring more and more and more, and you see more, and people giving you ideas for painting, how to do this, how to do that. It was a great time, absolutely fantastic. So my first battle, I was in charge of my section of Prussians. I don't think it was a full 30. I think it might have only been maybe 12. And we were put in a blockhouse to guard a crossroads. And my only orders were stay at the crossroads and guard them. So I did. And a couple of hours into the game, a French dispatch rider rode past down the road, and I shot him with all my men. And I searched his satchel, and in his satchel, the umpire gave me some secret orders and a map. And on the map, there was a gun position marked in a wood that was just a little bit across the road from where I was. Now, I had 2 choices at that point. I could, and what I should, have sent a message on to the bloke who was the Duke of Wellington. And everything, I'd gone back to my blockhouse and everything would have been fine. I didn't do that. I thought, aha, I can earn praise and great accreditation from these men, and they'll love me. So I abandoned my position with my 12 men, and I marched into the wood to destroy the gun. Whereupon I bumped into 60 French voltigeurs who were also in the wood, and I got wiped out. And after the game, one of the men said to me, "It's a good job you got killed, otherwise I'd have had to shoot you." Hey, you can bet your bottom dollar I didn't do that again. I've changed places. It's a different time of day. Ooh. 1973, we move on. And I'd gone to the club, and as I went in to play the Napoleonic game, there was a table with some older boys on, university students they were, and they had some big Britain's trees, big oak trees, and they had a few figures, but they had an elf and 2 dwarfs and 3 halflings, and a lot of goblins, all carrying bows, dragging their knuckles on the floor. I said, oh, they're playing The Hobbit, thinking I was a big clever dick. And they said, no, it's Lord of the Rings. I'd not heard of Lord of the Rings. I went and read it. I'm saying it like this because I've said it before, and a lot of you will have heard this tale. So anyway, I went, they were miniature figurines. So I started to buy miniature figurines from 1974. And the idea was that you would reenact war games, elves in blocks, none of this skirmish gaming. It was a war game. And the figures were made by miniature figurines on license to Tolkien, the Tolkien estate, to reenact the battles from Lord of the Rings. And we used Bill Lanning's rules, medieval rules, and what we did was we said, okay, elves are going to be like Welsh bowmen, longbowmen. Good morale, good rate of fire, steady. The goblins are going to be like levies, militia. I think we're rubbish. And we did that. Because, again, no fantasy rules. So we did that until I went to university. Now, I went to university in 75. And while I was there, and certainly before 1979, because that's when I got married, I started to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I played the first 3 modules, G1, G2, G3, and then I played the 2 of horrors, and I was hooked. Now, I was playing that using miniature figurines largely from their sword and sorcery range, but I was also buying Hinchcliffe figures, and I was also buying Asgard and Grenadier, and slowly but surely Citadel and the White Dwarf magazine came out. So things began to change. 1984, I got a job as a deputy head teacher in Burnley, and we had a war games club. And sometime between 84 and 86, a games workshop opened in Burnley, and that revolutionised everything. I remember being at a chess tournament with a lot of kids in Preston, and sort of at lunchtime, I went down into Preston, and there was a games workshop there, and I bought, first time I bought a pack of dwarfs, and I painted them like as if they were in the Confederate Army, all in greys and butternut and pale blue, to give them a sort of feeling of being in a specific army. I also at that time started to paint with acrylic paint for the first time. I painted an Eldar with a lance. And through the rest of the 80s into the 90s, I went to different clubs. Different clubs were playing different things. I went to a club where they were playing 40k, and everyone had Space Marines or Space Orcs. I liked squats. Still got my squats. They turn up every now and again. So I got squats. And I had squats on motorbikes, and I had all sorts. I had conversions. I had a squat in a Gloucester Gladiator Airfix kit plane with goggles on. And I gave him a scarf that stuck out like biggles. And under the plane, I had a table tennis ball painted black. And on it, I wrote, Acme Big Bomb, like they do in the Bugs Bunny cartoons. You see, you could get away with stuff like that back then. I don't know if you would now. And then, in the early 90s, the games changed. And the group I was with started to be more interested in Warhammer as opposed to 40k. And so the Warhammer figures began to appear. And our games changed again. And we started to use magic users using the cards that you got in some of the sets. Every wizard, you threw a D10. And that's how many cards you got. But we still mixed and matched it because we had dwarfs with blunderbusses and my friend liked orcs with big guns, but we were still in a sort of pseudo fantasy world, really. I was never overly happy with that. I like fantasy to be fantasy. But the club was the club, so if you wanted a big game, that's what you did. Having said that, I then moved again to a place where they were playing more orthodox war game rules. And eventually, 13 years ago, I ended up where I live now. And I went to the Wargames Club, and these chaps were pure historic. It was a club that you could play anything you wanted, but there were a large group of people playing historical games. First one I went to, they were playing muskets and tomahawks. And then the following week, someone else would put on a game, Rapid Fire. And then somebody else would put on a game, Shaco. And they'd bring all the figures and everything, and they'd umpire it, and you learn new rule systems. And that went on for quite some time. And then perhaps just before lockdown, I sort of paired up with a fella who was of a like mind to me. Hiya, Mike, if you're watching. And he was a big fan of specific games like Wings of Glory. He introduced me to the Japanese game Test of Honor. You get a game, you box, your cards, you have specific figures, perhaps smaller groups, more of a skirmish game. And we started to play on 4 foot by 3 foot tables, and we played Many Would Be Kings, we played Lion Rampant, Dragon Rampant. We played Pikeman's Lament, those Osprey games. So we did all that sort of stuff. And then we started to buy 10mm American Civil War, then we bought 6mm, and we got Ancients, and we got Fantasy, to do the big games, because we only, by that time, were playing on sort of 3 foot by 4 foot or 4 foot square tables. Then, last year, I started to do YouTube. Now, in doing YouTube, I occasionally showed people my old figures. And I've occasionally got to talk about a game I was only ever playing on my own. My Fantasy World, which I'd started back in 1973, the world of Joral. And I've still got all the notes and all the maps. And I don't throw anything away, not anything wargaming. I've still got all the figures. I've got a lot of the figures, and I've made up what I didn't have over time. And now I'm full circle. I'm just about to join a brand new Dungeons and Dragons club for the first time ever, because I've always been the guy who founded the Dungeons and Dragons club, because I was one of the first people in the country to play it. So no one at college knew what Dungeons and Dragons was till I forced them to play it. And same when I was a teacher and I would organise Wargames clubs, it was always me doing the organising. This is a group that exists, that I am going to go and I am going to gate crash. And I'm still playing first edition. My Dungeon Master's Guide and my Player's Handbook are first edition. They're the ones I got in 78. They're all full of scribble. I've got my original dice. So I'm taking them. I've got my original figures. So I'm taking them. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know if they use figures. Somebody told me a lot of these youngsters don't play with figures. So I don't know what to expect. But anyway, I'll keep you posted. And now we've got 3D printing. I'm not a fan. I know that makes me sound old, but I don't find you get the detail. And I'm also not a fan of this sort of another one of our main top subscribers, Eric, was talking about it the other day, and it's a good point. This sort of scale creep. Figures used to be 25mm. Then they became 28mm so they could get more detail on. And then they became big 28mm. And now they're 32mm. And the 3D printed figures, if you drop them, they snap. I don't know what I think. I want to play. I'm happy with 28mm. I like 28mm. But some figures look odd. I've been doing a pirate game, and I got some pirates. I can't remember where from. And they're huge. They look ridiculous amongst my 28mm pirates that I've been buying from Foundry and Perry's. So I can't use them. I'm wondering about painting them like a sort of ghostly, culty, dead pirate group to use in more role-play type pirate games, perhaps, rather than waste them. So, yeah, I'm back where I started. I'm playing with miniature figurines. I'm playing with Dungeons and Dragons. I am reopening all the old campaigns from the 70s. And I'm inflicting all of that on you. I don't know what you think. And because I'm sat downstairs, holding the phone, I can only give you a one thumber tonight. So, hey, ta-da, Chuck.